Hi, good morning, everyone. All right, so from today, we are going to start with the Apex triggers. See, inside in Apex programming, the triggers are considered to be the most, the most or the highest priority code, I should say. So triggers is particularly an Apex code, first of all, but this has the highest priority over all of the others. So if you have created a triggers, right? If you have created a triggers, so it is very much sure that this trigger is going to be get executed and it is going to perform the operation on for which it has been designed. Moreover, if we create a trigger, so we cannot merely stop the execution of trigger in between unless you have deactivated that. So trigger, if we are creating a trigger, first of all, if we are creating a trigger for a kind of requirement, the first thing what you should ask to yourself would be, does we really require a trigger for this, or this can be implemented with some other thing? I mean, there might be a few of, a few of simple business automation where you can implement that. You can implement those with either with the process builder or the flows. So if something can be implemented, if something can be implemented with a process builder or maybe with a flow would be always a good option because, down the time, sooner or later, but uh, these workflows and the process builder, they already have, Salesforce have already announced that they are going to decommission this. And this is going to be happen sooner or later. So with certain additions like, now itself, you cannot create a new process builder or a workflow. So I guess it would be safe to say that there are certain simple business automations what we can implement with the lightning flows. So, before if we are creating, if we are creating a trigger, we must have a very strong reason for that. And we must be, we must have like, we already have tried that implementing with some other thing and then we failed. And then we realized that this is something, oh, I just have to create a trigger for this. Because triggers are that a kind of Apex code, once it has been activated, it cannot be stopped in between. It's a highest priority code. It's a highest priority code that somebody could write down in Apex programming. So triggers are usually we create the triggers, but we initially try to implement the thing either with a process builder or maybe with the flows or maybe with just the flows, lightning flows. But if, for example, if due to certain circumstances, if you are unable to implement that, maybe with a flow, then the only option what left with us is triggers. So previously, what previous to prior to some years, like let's consider 2 years back. So if we go in time, like 2 years back, so lightning flow, although was introduced that time, but it was not that much capable. It was not that much capable. So maybe that time, if you are building up a logic, even if that was a very simple automation, there's only one recommendation to do that was the triggers. But as as the time crosses and as with every release of Salesforce that comes after every 3 months, we know that in an year, Salesforce come up with almost 3 release, right? So Salesforce has made the significant improvement inside in the lightning flows. So now basically what is happening is like, we always try to build up the automation by using lightning flows. But still there are few of circumstances wherein we tend to create a trigger for that. So triggers are basically the highest priority apex code, and which is once it is activated, there is no way to stop that trigger unless and until you deactivate that. And with yesterday's session, what we have taken on deployment, I have even told you that if a trigger is activated on the production, in the production, you cannot directly deactivate a trigger, right? This we already have seen. So if you have deployed a trigger on a production environment, by the way, if you wanted that trigger to get stopped running, actually, you cannot directly deactivate the triggers on the production. This can be done although in your development environment, right? We are going to write and I'm going to show you how you can activate and deactivate a trigger, but that is restricted only to the developer environment, also onto the sandboxes. But once a trigger is deployed to production, yesterday we have seen that scenario, right? There's no way you can deactivate the trigger apart from, right, there's only one way, like, you go to that environment where you have created that trigger, or maybe from where you actually have performed the deployment, deactivate the trigger in that environment. That could be a sandbox, and then perform the redeployment of that trigger. The deactivated trigger you'll have to redeploy. So this is the only way where you can deactivate a trigger on production. All right, chalo. So triggers are used to implement. The first thing is, like, what is a trigger? Trigger is a customized code. It's a customized code, and the use of trigger is like, whenever we wanted, whenever we wanted to implement a certain complicated business logic, something which we are not possibly we are not able to create that with maybe with lightning flows. Although lightning flows is very much enhanced, but still there might be certain things which you cannot implement with that, or you are more used to with the triggers. That completely depends, like, how what is your practice of building an automation. So in that case, we usually go with the triggers. Now see, there are apart from triggers, if I put apart from the triggers are something that could be far on before and after events. Before and after events, I'm going to talk more onto this before and after event, but let me try to elaborate, few other possibilities that we already have seen. If you would go with an validation rule, what was the first time when I have introduced you a validation rule? Can I ask you one question, like how many different ways by which you can make a field as a required field? If there is a field inside an object and I wanted that field to become a mandatory field, can any one of you please answer me this question? How many different ways you can make a field as a required field? Yes, anyone wanted to try this question?
Like 5 different ways.
All right, please go ahead and tell me what are those. G, the first
By
one is,
clicking the required checkbox.
all right, so there is a required checkbox. If you can click that. The second one,
By the validation rule.
by the validation rule is second. The third is page layout. Exactly.
By
Fourth, by triggers,
by triggers.
and by maybe like visual force programming or lightning page. Even on the lightning page, you can make it. So yes, of course, of course. Thank you so much, guys, for contributing on this. So there are at least 5 to 6 different ways we could make a field as a required one. So validation rule, if you remember, we created a few of the validation rule that time, when I was demonstrating to you, like how you can make a field required by the validation rule. So I'm not sure in which object, I'm not sure, but yeah, by the way, if you wanted to make a field, any field of this as a required field, so what we usually do is, like, we go to validation rules, and there we create a validation rule in a way like that particular field should become, that particular, we use a function called as is blank, right? We use a function called as is blank function. And then with the help of that is blank function, right? If I would is blank, and then I'll just enter the name of that field. So if that particular field is empty, so I'll insert over here the field, for example, contact number. I'm not sure whether this is already mandatory or what. I'm just trying to show you the formula. So if this field is blank, so we can give a mirror, we can give a message that contact field should always have a value, something like that. So this way, this particular field becomes a mandatory field. Now let's talk about the events. So we would have to understand something called as before and after event. And this way we'll have, this way we would going to understand, we're going to talk about all these things. We're going to talk about all these things. So see, if you are trying to, if you have make a field as a required field, let's say you have make a field a contact field Let's consider we have implemented this, and where is contact number? Oh, this is contact number, which is not, seems to be mandatory. I can do that. Let me show you this. Should always have a value. Very good. Now I should display that on the field level itself, contact number, and I'll give a make contact number as required. The rule which I am giving the name is make contact number as required. And now if I would save this, so what I have created, I created a validation rule which is going to make this field as a required one. So see, if I would supply this, if I would supply the names and everything over here, test record one, notice spread will be immediate, position applied would be Java developer, Delhi. Maybe we have one-to-one relationship, so this might create an issue over the time. Let me try out saving this record. Positions have been deleted because we have a rule created. We have a bash program which has deleted those positions, if I'm not wrong. See, the contact number field should always have a value. So the validation rule has fired, and it has detected that the contact number field does not, it's blank. It is blank. And we have a rule that if it is blank, if this field is blank, so you must stop the user saving the record, and you should display this error message. Now, where to display that? That is your choice. You can display that at the top of the page, or else you wanted to display precisely onto that particular field, you can make a selection of them as well. All right. Now, this is something which is known to us. Like, this is not, obviously, this is not the first time when you are creating a validation rule to make a field is required. I don't wanted you to understand this. Rather, I am focusing on something else. I am focusing on this thing. What is the event of this validation rule, before or after? Now, I would try to simplify this. If something has been applied, if a rule, let's say, if a rule has been applied, if a check has been applied after saving the record, then it is obviously falls under the after. Once you have saved the record, then it is going to check for the value. Then it is check for the rule. And before means like, if you are checking if the check is applied, if the rule is applied before saving the record, then it falls under the before event. So there are two forms of events, before event and after event. Now, about this validation rule, I'll ask you one simple question. Tell me, we have created a validation rule, and this validation rule is checking whether this contact number field, it is blank or it is having a value. So when I'm trying to save something, I created a record and I try to save it, right? I try to save it. When I try to save it, tell me one thing, simple thing, whether this validation rule has been applied after saving the record, after this record I have created, whether this validation rule is applied after saving the record or before saving the record. What you see, what you observe. What do you observe? Tell me whether this record has been saved or not. Test record 1. Is this record saved or not? Tell me. So if I would go to the candidate and I'll make a list, I'll go to the list of all candidate. There's only one, by the way. I'm not sure why. Do you see this test record? अब ये तो ये देख के तो yes or no बता ही सकते हो यार.
No, sir.
So what does it mean? Whether that record has been saved or not? Tell me. Whether that record has been saved or not?
Not saved, I think.
No, it has not. It has not been saved. So you created a record, but because you have not supplied the value of contact number in that record, so validation rule has stopped you. Stopped you from what? Stopped you from saving the record. The validation rule has stopped you from saving the record. This means the validation rule is applied before saving the record. Before saving the record. Agar validation rule after, if validation rule is being applied after saving the record, तो मुझे यहाँ पे record दिख रहा होता था, I can see that record. मुझे यहाँ record दिख रहा होता था. But because that record has not been saved, this means validation rule is applied before saving the record. एक बार अगर रिकॉर्ड सेव हो गया तो वो आपको यहाँ नजर आता था. लाइक यू कैन सी द कुणाल्स रिकॉर्ड, है ना, कुणाल्स रिकॉर्ड. तो बेसिकली इज व्हाट validation rule is something that is always applied before on its the event is before actually. Either you are inserting a record or you are updating a record. So if I would go this record, and if I'll try to edit this, and let's say I'll not supply the value of this contact number. Now even I'm see the already record is already over there. If I try to save this again, I would face the same error. So this is what is a validation rule. Validation rule is always applied before saving the record. Now, whether you are saving a new record, that means you are performing an insert operation, or if you are saving the existing record, you have performed certain editing into that. After updation, if you're trying to save it, so again, it would try it, it would be get applied onto the same. So validation rules is something that is always applied before saving the record, before insert or before update. Just insert and update. It is not applied before deleting or before undelete. It is not applied. Second, come on formula. Formula fields. Second, let's come on to the formula fields. So formula field is applied. I mean, apart from validation rule, every other thing, whether that is a formula or a roll-up summary, workflow, process builder, sharing rules, assignment rules, this everything is applied only after insert, after update. So these are like, these are something that is based on after event. So if you have designed a formula field, like I guess inside the position object, inside in the position object, we have created a formula field, right? To identify those positions where the milestone date have been crossed, right? If you remember that. And see, do you see one thing over here? We have created a batch program in the past. We have created a batch program which would delete all those positions record where the milestone date have been crossed. And if you can see, all of those positions have been already deleted. You wanted to see when this batch have been executed. Let's go to that job and let's go to the Apex job. So purge close position. This has been run 2 times. Purge position. Okay, this is queued, but this has been run. See, purge close position batch job. So total number of batches were 2. 2 of them has been processed and no failures. And it has run on 30th of last month. So we have selected that last day of every month, isn't it? So that has run in the 10 p.m. in the night. And that is the reason, inside in the position object, we can see only those positions where the milestone date is still left. So this batch program is going to run on every last day of the month, and it would going to see for those position record which can be deleted, and it would delete that record, right? So for this position record can be deleted, this field actually is a formula field. And I've designed a formula to check for the milestone date. If today is less than something like, that was my formula, then it is checked, otherwise unchecked. So formula fields, they are always executed after inserting and after update. Once you perform that operation, for example, if I would open this position, right? And if I would perform any changes inside in the milestone date, let me take it as May, June, something like that of this year. Now, if I would save this, so milestone date, then I guess I did something wrong. June, 5th of June. Oh, so now if you can say position record can be deleted has been checked. So this, see, previously it was unchecked. Now this is checked, but this has been checked after saving the record. I mean, after inserting or after update. Now, if again I would make any changes to this, right? If I would make any changes, for example, I'll pick up a date. I'll pick up a date like this. So once I save the record, so then it has checked. So this is what I wanted you to understand. So the formula fields, the roll-up summaries, workflows, they are always applied on after. Formula cannot be applied on before. Validation cannot be applied after. So these all entities, apart from the flows, that's why I have commented it out. Flows is powerful. Flow can be applied, flow can be applied after and before. And it can be applied after insert, update, delete, before and after delete. So flow is something that is more powerful. I already have told you. So let's, exclude this flow from this discussion, what we are doing right now. We'll just include all these things. So these everything have certain restrictions, like validation can be only applied onto before. It cannot be applied after. Formula, roll-up summary, validations, process builders, they can be applied only in after operation, maybe after insert or after update. They cannot be used before. So all of these components, all of these components, we're having certain limitations to them. And that is the reason, that is the reason for certain complicated logic, you cannot make a use of, them. So this is like, this is a motivation to us why we are studying triggers, why we are studying with the triggers. So triggers, if we would exclude the flows, trigger is that business logic. First of all, trigger can be fired, you read this sentence, trigger can be fired on both kind of events, either before, either after. If something you wanted to check for, if there is a rule you wanted it to be get applied before saving the record, then also you can create a trigger. If there is a rule which you wanted to apply after saving the record, after insert, after update, after delete, something like that, then also, you can go with the trigger. So trigger is that customized code which can be applicable, which we can make it applicable on either on before or on after. That is what is a trigger. So that's why we are discussing this, right? All right. Now let's move on to the trigger. What is the syntax? How does it looks like to be? And moreover, trigger events, trigger context variables, and everything. There would be few of the things which I can make you understand from the theoretical thing. Otherwise, there are a lot of the things which you would only understand when you write down a trigger, especially context variables. Context variable is something which if you try to read it with the theory, it seems to be very difficult. But when the same thing, if you would implement this in the program, this entire confusions and everything have been removed. We're going to see that. First of all, let's understand how you are going to write. What is the general syntax of writing a trigger? So if you, writing a trigger, always start with a trigger. Like public class, and it does not have any access specifiers. First of all, access specifiers, only classes would have the access specifiers, and the methods have access specifiers. Trigger does not have any access specifier. There's no public, private, global, something like that, right? There's nothing. I just have to write down trigger. Trigger, give the name of the trigger. Give the name of the trigger. Trigger, my trigger, your trigger, my first trigger, my second trigger. Don't ever name a trigger like this. Trigger has to be named usually on the object. So if you are creating something for account, we usually give a name like accounts trigger, lead trigger, contact trigger, or what you are trying to perform, lead convert trigger, contact check trigger, quote assignment trigger. So we always try to give a significant name so that name itself would understand what is the purpose of writing this trigger. Anyways, trigger, then trigger name. Then on. On is another keyword. On. Now give the name of the object. Give the name of the object on which you are applying. Give the name of the object like account, case, position, lead, opportunity, contact, whatever the name of the object on which you are creating this trigger. Give the name of that object. And then write down the event. Write down the event. So what is an event? We're going to understand. So we're going to see this, right? What is an event? Event are of two types, before and after, as I have told you. Before and after. But then it should also, the before and after should, this should be accompanied with what is the operation. So that is what I'm telling you. See, theoretically, I could explain few of the things better. It would be, I guess, it would be a better thing if we would see that in the program. Probably that time you would understand it more. But still, I'll try to expand this, I'll try to explain this as far as possible. Otherwise, every one of us, we would feel more comfortable when we would write a trigger actually. So the syntax of trigger is like this. First, start with trigger. This is a keyword. On is also a keyword. Trigger, trigger name, on, name of the object. And inside in the bracket, you'll have to write down the events. Then opening bracket, closing bracket, curly brackets, of course. This entire, I mean, the whole business logic, you have to write it down inside in this curly brackets. That is block of trigger. So this is the general syntax of writing a trigger. Now let's come to the event part. What is an event? There are two events. There are two types of triggers. This is a common interview question. How many different types of triggers are there? How many different types of triggers are there? Let me try to elaborate this with the help of a diagram. So, usually people answer this very strangely. But if somebody would ask you how many different types of triggers are there, majorly there are only two triggers. There are in the top level, there are only two types of triggers: before trigger, and then there is something called as after trigger. There's something called as an after trigger. Triggers basically on the top level, there are only two types of triggers: before and after. Before and after. Now, depending upon the type of operation, the type of kind of DML, they are further classified. Like DML could be like, insert, update, delete, undelete. So these are some of the operations. So there could be a before insert trigger. There could also be an after insert trigger. Before insert, after insert. Before update, after update. Before update, after update. And before delete, there's nothing called as after delete. There's nothing called as an after delete. All right. Delete only have before delete. So before deleting something, I could check for. Well, we have a sample. We have a program for that. We are going to take one program where the event would be before delete, but there's nothing called as an after delete. So before insert, before update, before insert, before update. Sorry, before insert, after insert, before update, after update. Before delete, but not after delete. Before undelete, after undelete. Right? यहाँ in delete को छोड़ के बाकी सब में before और after दोनों event लगते हैं. So it is like before insert, after insert, before update, after update, before delete, before undelete, after undelete. So triggers basically are of two types. Triggers basically are of two types. Triggers basically are of two types, first of all. If somebody would ask this you in the interview, you have to answer that on the top level. There are two types of triggers: before trigger and after trigger. Now, depending upon what kind of operation it would perform, I can further classify this as before trigger, before insert, after insert. There's a trigger before insert trigger, or there could be after insert trigger. There could be a before update trigger and after update trigger. Before delete trigger. यहाँ पे थोड़ा सा ध्यान रखना, after delete मत बोल देना. Before delete trigger, before undelete and after undelete trigger. So these are the types of the triggers. These are the types of triggers, right? But at the top level, there are only two forms of the trigger: before triggers and after triggers. So event are of two types: before and after. Events are only of two types: before and after, depending upon what kind of DML you wanted to apply. So based on that, it becomes like before insert trigger, before update trigger, before delete trigger. These all are before and before undelete. One second. No, there's no before undelete. Yes, I was wrong about this. There's nothing called as before undelete. Yes, of course. So delete operation is only after. No, there's before delete. Yes, there's before delete, not after delete. But after undelete is there. Yes, after delete है क्या? After delete roll of summary पे apply करते हैं. Yes. Okay. Let me draw this diagram once again. Yes. I made myself confused about this. There are two forms of triggers. Let's say before and after. And now, depending upon what you are performing, insert and then update and then delete and then undelete. Yes. So it is like, before insert, after insert, before update, after update, even before delete and after delete. Before delete and after delete. But there is nothing called as before undelete. It's always after undelete. Yes. So it's always after undelete. There's nothing called as before undelete. Right. So a roll-up summary particularly is a trigger where you have before and after delete event, of course. But for after the undelete operation, there's only an after trigger. For undelete operation, there's only an after undelete trigger. There's no trigger called as before undelete. So there is only an after undelete trigger. After undelete. Remember this, right? Remember this. After undelete. All right. So these are all the kinds of triggers which we can perform, which we can execute. I guess we are going to take example almost on every one of them, or maybe I'm going to, I'll take few of them and I'm going to give you the assignments as well as onto that. Anyways, let's come on to the second thing, which is trigger context variable. This is something which I guess a little of this you would understand right now, maybe 10 or 20%. मैं जितना भी explain कर लूं, maybe you could only get 10 or 20% out of this. But जब हम triggers लिखना शुरू करेंगे तब आपको ये पूरा समझ में आएगा कि where to apply the trigger context variable. Now, first of all, what is a trigger context variable? See, trigger context variable specifically define what operation the trigger is performing or what operation onto which the trigger has to be applied. It's a kind of check. It's a kind of check. It's a kind of, I could say, it's a kind of validation trigger, what kind of operation trigger is performing. So before applying any business logic, we check for the operation. You will going to understand, don't worry. That's why, in the beginning itself, I have cleared you. Okay, whatever I'm going to say to explain this, maybe you would get 10 or 20% out of that. But when we start coding the trigger, the rest 70 to 80% is going to be covered in the coding. And there you would understand this everything. Don't worry. So there are there are multiple context variables. Mostly we are going to use like trigger dot is insert, is update, is delete, is undelete, is before, is after. Yes. So out of this, out of this nine context variable, mostly we use trigger dot is insert, trigger dot is update, trigger dot is delete, is undelete, is before, and is after. And there are very rare circumstances where this can be used. Is executing, size, and operation type. They are very used. They are very rare. But yes, they are there, right? तो इसको लिखा इसलिए है कि in future if you would see this, तो आप ये ना सोचे कि what is this, right? So yes, of course, there are very rare operations where might be you can use for is executing size or operation type. They are very rare. Mostly, what we would be using is trigger dot is insert, is update, is delete, undelete, before and after. And see, the return type of everyone is Boolean. So this is a type of question what you ask to trigger. Let's try to understand this in this way. Let's try to understand, this way. So this is a kind of question. What are the context variable? Let's try to understand that this is a question. And we ask this question to the trigger. We ask this question to the trigger. And what is the reply? Reply would always be a Boolean, true or false. Either trigger will answer as true or false. Let's say I have asked a question, trigger dot is insert. So this is a kind of question that I'm asking a trigger. Are you performing an insert? Are you checking for an insert operation? Are you going to be applied for an insert operation? Once that insert would be performed, are you going to apply? So if it would return me yes, it means yes, the trigger has been designed on insert operation. If it would return me false, that means the trigger is not checking for the insert. It is checking for something else. I would ask a question, trigger dot is update. Trigger, are you going to apply after update? After, not after update specifically. Trigger, are you applied onto update DML? Are you applied onto the update operation? If it would return me true, then yes, oh, this trigger is applied on the update operation. False, this trigger is not applied on the update operation. This trigger is applied on the delete operation. False, not. This trigger is applied on the undelete operation. Is before, are you checking something before saving the record? Are you checking something after saving the record? So, these are like a questions. For now, what you can say is like, this is a question which I would ask in the program, I'm going to ask this question to trigger. And trigger in the program itself would return me the reply of that, either true or false. So basically, trigger context variables are used to define what operation trigger is actually performing. And the most important thing, what trigger context variable do is something called as a bulkification of a trigger. Something called as bulkification. As a best practice, I guess it has been written. Trigger bulkification. Let me see to this. Triggers best practices. This is another common interview question you have to write down. Trigger should support the bulk record. That is, we should always create a bulky fight trigger. We should always create a bulky fight trigger. Trigger should always be a bulky fight trigger. Trigger should always be a bulky fight trigger. So what is a bulky fight trigger? We would understand that. We would going to understand what is a bulky fight trigger. So whenever a trigger, if we are writing a trigger, the first thing is like, it has to be a bulky fight trigger. It has to be a, it has to be a bulky fight trigger. So how you can make a trigger as to be a bulky fight trigger? Trigger context variable plays a very important role over there. Right. Apart from like deciding the operation, apart from asking a question to trigger what kind of operation you are performing. Are you performing an insert, update, delete, and delete? Are you performing this before or after? Before saving, after saving? So apart from asking this question, trigger context variable plays a very vital role in the bulkification of trigger, and which is a best practice. If you are creating a trigger, that should be a bulkified trigger. What is this bulkified trigger? How to create that? How this context variable plays an important role over there? We're going to understand everything. Abhi to hum sirf theory discuss kar rahe hain, boss, right? We're just trying to get an overview we're just trying to see this from the top level, and we're just trying to map and boundary across. Okay, this is something where I'm going to study. This is something when I'm going to create a program for this. So we're just trying to get an overview out of this. Otherwise, we are going to deal with every specific topic inside in this. Whatever we are talking right now, whatever I am explaining you right now, bulkification of trigger, context variables, events, and all, for every concept, we are going to, for insert operation, delete operation, update operation, we would be creating a programs for that. And obviously, when we create a program, we are going to we would going to understand it in a much better way that time. So right now, just try to take an overview and try to grab the things as far as possible. Then there would be one another thing, there would be one another thing called as trigger.new, new map, old and old map. Trigger.new, new map, trigger.old and old map. This is what I'm keeping this pending for right now, because I don't wanted you to feel that this is a very complicated thing rather. So I'm keeping this pending right now. So what I'm going to do would be like, when I would start explaining you the trigger, that time, I would make you aware about what is trigger.new, new map, what is trigger.old and old map. So learning triggers, could be little complicated if you try to digest everything in one shot. So rather, the better thing would be like, let's divide this into certain small doses, and that we are going to take it periodically. All right, let's divide this into certain small doses, and let's try to take only a single shot at a time. So that would be easy to digest. That would be easy to grab. That would be easy to understand. So we would, there's something called as trigger.new. I just wanted you to heard the names of that. Yes, I have heard that name. I am not sure what it is, but at least I heard the name. There's something called as trigger.new, new map, trigger.old and trigger.old map. What it is exactly, what it is used for, I don't know right now, but at least I have heard that names. मुझे पता है, मैंने इनके नाम सुने हुए हैं. ठीक है, what it is we are going to see. And then we would going to understand what the bulkification, ways to create of triggers and everything. I'm going to cover this. Don't worry, I'm going to cover this. So by tomorrow morning, I'm going to start by writing the very first trigger, and there would be a lot of the things what I'm going to explain with that single program. There would be a lot of the things I'm going to explain you with that single program. Maybe this single program, I would explain it for 2 days. And I'll try to cover everything, process of bulkification, trigger context variables, and few of the best practices as well. So this is, with this first program, I would elaborate you each and everything. And I might require 2 days for writing the only one program. I might require, or I'll try to cover this in a single lecture if it's possible, if time permits me. All right. So tomorrow we are going to start with actual writing of the triggers. I guess this much is sufficient for today. If you have anything to ask, please go ahead. Yes. If you have any questions, please let me know that. Yes. If you have any question, please let me know that. All right, then. Thank you so much for joining. Have a nice day.